I am the Epileptic Explorer, and tonight we will continue our reading in Ruin and Rising. This is the third book in the trilogy for Shadow and Bone, and there's a Netflix series out. There were 2 seasons that came out. I think they're also hoping to do a spin-off, but that didn't work. But I'm hoping one day to see it again once we get Netflix up and going again. So, if you're new to my channel and you're watching this, please, if you're enjoying any of my videos, please like and subscribe. Press the bell icon to be notified for the next videos. So yeah, I hope you all enjoy this book, or enjoying this book, and so yeah, without further ado, let's see if we can get up to 200 subscribers, please. That would help me out with this channel, and that would get me that would help me get some more help me get some more videos done. So anywho, I hope you all are enjoying this, and let's go ahead and get started. Alright, Chapter 9. He was sitting on the edge of a table, his shirt crumpled into a bowl at his knee, his arms raised above his head as the vague shape of a Krupelnik healer came in and out of focus, tending to a bloody gash in the darkling's side. I thought at first we might be in the infirmary at the little palace, but the space was too dark and blurry for me to tell. I tried not to notice the way he looked, his mused hair, the shadowed ridges of his bare chest. He seemed so human. Just a boy wounded in battle. Or maybe sparring. Not a boy, I reminded myself. A monster who has lived hundreds of years and taken hundreds of lives. His jaw tensed as the Krupelnik finished her work, when the skin had knitted together. The Darkling dismissed her with a wave. She hovered briefly, then slipped away, fading into nothing. There's nothing I've seen. There's something I've been wondering, he said. No greeting, no preamble. I waited. The night that Bagra told you that I intended, the night you fled the little palace, did you hesitate? Yes. In the days after you left, did you ever think of coming back? I did, I admitted, but you chose not to. I knew I should go. I should at least have stayed silent, but I was so weary, and it felt so easy to be here with him. It wasn't just what Bagra said that night. You lied to me. You deceived me. You drew me in, seduced me, made me want you, made me question my own heart. I need your loyalty, Alina. I needed you bound to me by more than duty or fear. His fingers tested the flesh where his wound had been. Only a mild redness remained. There are rumors that your Ladsov prince has been sighted. I drifted near, trying to keep my voice casual. Where? He glanced up, his lips curling in a slight smile. Do you like him? Does it matter? It's harder when you like them. You mourn them. You mourn them more. How many had he mourned? Had there been friends? A wife? Had he ever let anyone get that close? Tell me, Alina, said the Darkling. Has he claimed you yet? Claimed me? Like a peninsula? No blushes, no averted eyes. How you've changed. What about your faithful tracker? Will he sleep curled at the foot of your throne? He was pressing, trying to provoke me. Instead of shying away, I moved closer. You came to me wearing Maul's face that night in your chambers. Was it because you knew I would turn you away? His fingers tightened on the table's edge, but then he shrugged. He was the one you longed for. Do you still? No. An apt pupil, but a terrible liar. Why do you have such disdain for Atkatsya? No disdain, understanding. You're not all fools and weaklings. What they are is predictable, he said. The people would love you for a time, but what would they think when their good king aged and died? When his witch of a wife, remained young? When all those who remember your sacrifices are dust in the ground, how long do you think it will take for their children or their grandchildren to turn on you? His words sent a chill through me. I still couldn't get my head around the idea of the long life that lay ahead of me, that yawning abyss of eternity. You never considered it, did you? Said the Darkling. You live in a single moment. I live in 1,000. Are we not all things? In a flash, his hand snaked out and seized my wrist. The room came into sudden focus. He yanked me close, wedging me between his knees. His other hand pressed to the small of my back. His strong fingers splayed over the curve of my spine. You were meant to be my balance, Alina. You are the only person in the world who might rule with me, who might keep my power in check. And who will balance me? The words emerged before I thought better of them, giving raw voice to a thought that haunted me even more than the possibility that the Firebird didn't exist. What if I'm no better than you? What if instead of stopping you, I'm just another avalanche? He studied me for a long moment. He had always watched me this way, as if I were an equation that didn't quite tally. I want you to know my name, he said. The name I was given, not the title I took for myself. Will you have it, Alina? I could feel the weight of Nikolai's ring in my palm back at the spinning wheel. I didn't have to stand here in the Darkling's arms. I could vanish from his grasp, slide back into consciousness and the safety of a stone room hidden in a mountaintop. But I didn't want to go. Despite everything, I wanted this whispered confidence. Yes, I breathed. After a long moment, he said, Alexander. A little laugh escaped me. He arched a brow, a smile tugging at his lips. What? It's just so common. Such an ordinary name, held by kings and peasants alike. I'd known 2 Alexanders at Karamzin alone, 3 in the First Army. One of them had died on the fold. His smile deepened, and he cocked his head to the side. It almost hurt to see him this way. Will you say it? He asked. I hesitated, feeling danger crowd in on me. Alexander, I whispered. His grin faded, and his gray eyes seemed to flicker. Again, he said, Alexander. He leaned in. I felt his breath against my neck, then the press of his mouth against my skin just above the collar, almost a sigh. Don't, I said. I drew back, but he held me tighter. His hand went to the nape of my neck, long fingers twining in my hair, easing my head back. I closed my eyes. Let me, he murmured against my throat. His heel hugged around my leg, bringing me closer. I felt the heat of his tongue, the flecks of hard muscle beneath bare skin, as he guided my hands around his waist. It isn't real, he said. Let me. I felt that rush of hunger, the steady, longing beat of desire that neither of us wanted, but that gripped us anyway. We were alone in the world, unique. We were bound together, and always would be. And it didn't matter. I couldn't forget what he'd done, and I wouldn't forgive what he was. A murderer, a monster, a man who had tortured my friends and slaughtered the people I tried to protect. I shoved away from him. It's real enough. His eyes narrowed. I grow weary of this game, Alina. I was surprised at the anger that surged to life in me. Weary? You've toyed with me at every turn. You haven't tired of the game. You're just sorry I'm not so easily played. Clever, Alina, he bit out. The apt pupil, I'm glad you came tonight. I wanted to share my news. He yanked his bloody shirt on over his head. I'm going to enter the fold. Go ahead, I said. The Volca deserve another piece of you. They will not have it. You hope to find their appetites changed? Or is this just more madness? Go ahead. I'm not mad. Ask David what secrets he left for me to discover at the palace. I stilled. Another clever one, said the Darkling. I'll be taking him back too, when this is all over. Such an able mind. You're bluffing, I said. The Darkling smiled, but this time the turn of his lips was cold. He shoved off the table and stalked toward me. I will enter the fold, Alina, and I will show West Ravka what I can do, even without the Sun Summoner. And when I have crushed Lansov's only ally, I will hunt you like an animal. You will find no sanctuary. You will have no peace. He loomed over me, his gray eyes glinting. Fly back home to your Otkazia, he snarled. Hold him tight. The rules of this game are about to change. The Darkling raised his hand, and the cut tore through me. I shattered and gusted back into my body with an icy jolt. I clutched at my torso, heart hammering in my chest, still feeling the slice of shadow through it. But I was whole and unmarked. I stumbled out of bed, trying to find the lantern, then gave up and fumbled around until I found my coat and boots. Tamar was standing guard outside my room. Where is David lodged? I asked. Just down the corridor with Adric and Harsha. Are Maul and Toya sleeping? She nodded. Wake them up. She slipped into the guard's room, and Maul and Toya were outside with us seconds later, awake instantly in the way of soldiers and already pulling on their boots. Maul had his pistol. If you won't need that, I said. At least, I don't think you will. I considered sending someone to get Nikolai, but I wanted to know what we were dealing with first. We strode down the hall, and when we got to David's room, Tamar rapped once at the door before pushing in. Apparently, Adric and Harsha had been evicted for the night. A very blurry Genya and David blinked up at us from beneath the covers of a single narrow cot. I pointed at David. Get dressed, I said. You have 2 minutes. What? Genya began. Just do it. We slipped back out the door to wait. Maul gave a little cough. Can't say I'm surprised. Tamar snorted. After his little speech in the war room, even I considered pouncing on him. Moments later, the door cracked open, and a disheveled, barefoot David ushered us in. Genya was seated cross-legged on the cot, her red curls going every which way. What is it? Said David. What's wrong? I've received information that the Darkling intends to use the fold against West Ravka. Did Nikolai? Tamar began. I held up a hand. I need to know if it's possible. David shook his head. He can't without you. He needs to enter the Unsea to expand it. He claims he can. He claims you left secrets at the little palace. Wait a minute, said Genya. Where is this information coming from? Sources, I said curtly. David, what did he mean? I didn't want to believe David would betray us, at least not deliberately. David frowned. When we fled Oz Alta, I left my old notebooks behind, but they're hardly dangerous. What was in them? I asked Tamar. All kinds of things, he said, his nimble fingers pleating and unpleating the fabric of his trousers. The designs for the mirrored dishes, a lens to filter different waves of the spectrum, nothing you could use to enter the fold. But, he paled slightly. What else? It was just an idea. What else? There was a plan for a glass skiff that Nikolai and I came up with. I frowned and glanced at Maul. Then at the others. They all looked as puzzled as I did. Why would he want a glass skiff? The frame is made to hold lumia. I made an impatient gesture. What's lumia? A variation of liquid fire. Saints. Oh, David, you didn't. Liquid fire was one of Morozova's creations. It was sticky, flammable, and created a blaze that was almost impossible to extinguish. It was so dangerous that Morozova had destroyed the formula only hours after he'd created it. No! David held his hands up defensively. No, this is better, safer. The reaction only creates light, not heat. I came up with it when we were trying to find ways to improve the flash bombs for fighting the Nishovia. It wasn't applicable, but I liked the idea, so I kept it for later. He shrugged helplessly. It burns without heat? It's just a source of artificial sunlight. Enough to keep the Volcra at bay? At bay? Yes, but it's useless to the Darkling. It has a limited burn life, and you need sunlight to activate it. How much? Very little. That was the point. It was just another way of magnifying your power. Like the dishes. But there isn't any light in the fold, so I held out my hands and shadows spilled over the walls. Genya cried out, and David shrank back against the bed. Toya and Timur reached for their weapons. I dropped my arms, and the shadows returned to their ordinary forms. Everyone gaped at me. You have his power? Whispered Genya. No, just a scrap of it. Maul thought I'd taken it from the Darkling. Maybe the Darkling had taken something from me too. That's how you made the shadows jump when we were in the kettle, said Toya. I nodded. Timur jabbed a finger at Maul. You lied to us. I kept your secrets, Maul said. You would have done the same. She crossed her arms. Toya laid a big hand on her shoulder. They all looked upset, but not as scarred as they might have. You see what this means? I said. If the Darkling has even a remnant of my power, would it be enough to hold off the Volcra? Asked Genya. No, I said. I don't think so. I'd needed an amplifier before I was able to command enough light to safely enter the fold. Of course, there was no guarantee that the Darkling hadn't taken more of my power when we'd faced each other in the chapel. And yet, if he'd been able to truly wield light, he would have acted before this. It doesn't matter, said David miserably. He only needs enough sunlight to activate the Lumia once he's in the fold. Plenty of light for protection, said Maul. A well-armed skiff of Grisha and soldiers. Timur shook her head. Even for the Darkling, that seems risky. But Toya answered her with my own thoughts. You're forgetting the Nishovia. Shadow soldiers fighting Volcra? Genya said in horror. Saints, swore Timur. Who do you root for? The problem was always containment, said David. Lumia eats through everything. The only thing that worked was glass, but that presents its own engineering problems. Nikolai and I never resolved them. It was just for fun. If the Darkling hadn't solved those problems already, he would. You will find no sanctuary. You will have no peace. I put my head in my hands. He's going to break West Ravka. And after that, no country would dare to stand with me or Nikolai. That's the end of chapter 9. Let me just see really quick. The next chapter, because I bet it's because it was so short that they know it's going to be a longer chapter. Yes. Alright, let's go ahead and continue with chapter 10. A half hour later, we were seated at the end of a table in the galley, empty glasses of tea in front of us. Genya had made herself scarce. But David was there, his head bent over a pile of drafting paper as he tried to recreate the plans for the glass skiff and the formula for Lumia from memory. For better or worse, I didn't believe he'd aided the Darkling intentionally. David's crime was hunger for knowledge, not power. The rest of the spinning wheel was empty and silent. Most of the soldiers and rogue Grisha still asleep. Despite being hauled out of bed in the middle of the night, Nikolai managed to look put together, even with his olive drab coat thrown over his nightshirt and trousers. It hadn't taken long to update him on all I had learned, and I wasn't surprised by the first question out of his mouth. How long have you known this? He said. Why didn't you tell me sooner? An hour, maybe less. I only waited to confirm the information with David. That's impossible. Improbable, I corrected gently. Nikolai, my gut clenched. I glanced at Maul. I hadn't forgotten the way he'd reacted when I'd finally told him I was seeing visions of the Darkling. And this was far worse because I'd gone looking for him. I heard it from the Darkling's lips himself. He told me, beg your pardon? I can visit him, like a kind of vision. I sought him out. There was a long beat. You can spy on him? Not exactly. I tried to explain the way the rooms appeared to me, how he appeared. I can't hear other people or really even see them if they aren't immediately next to him or in contact with him. It's as if he's the only real material thing. Nikolai's fingers were drumming on the tabletop. But we could try to probe for information, he said, his voice excited. Maybe even feed him false intelligence. I blinked. Then, that quickly, Nikolai was strategizing. I should have been used to it by now. Can you do this with other Grisha? Maybe try to get in their heads? I don't think so. The Darkling and I are connected. We probably always will be. I have to warn Westrovka, he said. They'll need to evacuate the area along the shore of the fold. Nikolai rubbed a hand over his face. It was the first crack I'd seen in his confidence. They won't keep to the alliance, will they? Maul asked. I doubt it. I doubt it. The blockade was a gesture Westrovka was willing to make when they thought they were safe from reprisal. If they capitulate, said Tamor, will the Darkling still march? This isn't just about the blockade, I said. It's about isolating us, making sure we don't have anywhere to turn. It's about power. He wants to use the fold. He always has. I restrained the urge to touch my bare wrist. It's a compulsion. What kind of numbers can you raise? Maul asked Nikolai. All told? We could probably rally a force of roughly 5,000. They're spread throughout cells in the northwest, so the problem is mobilizing. But I think it can be done. We also have reason to suspect some of the militias may be loyal to us. There have been massive desertions from the base of Polensnaya and the northern and southern fronts. What about the Soldat Soul? Asked Tolia. They'll fight. I know they would lay down their lives for Alina. They've done it before. I rubbed my arms, thinking of more lives lost, of Ruby's fiercely cheerful face marked by the sunburst tattoo. Nikolai frowned. But can we rely on the apparat? The priest had been instrumental in the soup that had almost brought down Nikolai's father, and unlike Genya, he hadn't been a vulnerable servant victimized by the king. He'd been a trusted advisor. What exactly does he want? I think he wants to survive, I said. I doubt he'll risk a head-on confrontation with the Darkling unless he's sure of the outcome. We could use the additional numbers, Nikolai admitted. A dull ache was forming near my right temple. I don't like this, I said. Any of it. You're talking about throwing a lot of bodies at the Nishovia. The casualties will be unheard of. You know I'll be right out there with them, said Nikolai. All that means is I can add your number to the dead. If the Darkling uses the fold to sever us from any possible allies, then Rovka is his. He'll only get stronger, consolidate his forces. I won't just give up. You saw what those monsters did to the little palace. You said it yourself. He won't stop. He needs to use his power, and the more he uses it, the more he'll crave. This may be our last opportunity to bring him down. Besides, rumor has it Ortsev here is quite the tracker. If he finds the Firebird, we may just stand a chance. And if he doesn't, Nikolai shrugged. We put on our best clothes and die like heroes. Dawn was breaking. By the time we finished hashing out the specifics of what we intended to do next, the Kingfisher had returned, and Nikolai sent it right back out again with a refreshed crew and a warning addressed to Westrovka's merchant council that the Darkling might be planning an attack. They also carried an invitation to meet with him and the Sun Summoner in neutral Kerch. It was too dangerous for Nikolai and me to risk getting caught in what might soon be enemy territory. The Pelican was back in the hangar and would soon depart for Karemzit without us. I wasn't sure if I was sorry or relieved that I wouldn't be able to travel with them to the orphanage. But there just wasn't time for a detour, and Maul and his team would leave for the Skurzoi tomorrow aboard the Bittern, and I would meet up with them a week later. We would keep to our plan and hope the Darkling didn't act before then. There was more to discuss, but Nikolai had letters to write, and I needed to talk to Bagra. The time for lessons was over. I found her in her darkened lair. The fire already stoked, the room unbearably warm. Misha had just brought in her breakfast tray. I waited as she ate her buckwheat kasha and sipped her black tea. When she was done, Misha opened the book to begin his reading, but Bagra silenced him quickly. Take the tray up, she said. The little saint has something on her mind. If we make her wait any longer, she may jump out of her seat and shake me. Horrible woman. Did nothing escape her? Misha lifted the tray. Then he hesitated, shifting from one foot to the other. Do I have to come right back down? Stop with wriggling like a grub, Bagra snapped, and Misha froze. She gave a wave. Go on, you useless thing, but don't be late with my lunch. He raced out the door, dishes rattling, and kicked it shut behind him. It is your fault, Bagra complained. He can never be still anymore. He's my little boy. He's a little boy. It's not something they're known for. I made a mental note to have someone continue Misha's fencing lessons while we were gone. Bagra scowled and leaned closer to the fire, pulling her furs close around her. Well, she said, we are alone. What is it you want to know? Or would you rather sit there biting your tongue for another hour? I wasn't sure how to proceed. Bagra, either spit it out or let me take a nap. The Darkling may have found a way to enter the fold without me. He'll be able to use it as a weapon. If there's anything you can tell us, we need information. Always the same question. When I asked you if Morozova could have left the amplifiers unfinished, you said it wasn't his way. Did you know him? We're done here, girl, she said, turning back to the fire. You've wasted your morning. You told me once that you hoped for redemption for your son. This may be my last chance to stop him. Ah, so you hope to save my son now? How forgiving of you. I took a deep breath. Alexander, I whispered. She stilled. His true name is Alexander, and if he takes this step, he'll be lost forever. We may all be. That name, Bagra leaned back in her chair. Only he could have told you. When? I'd never spoken of the visions to Bagra, and I didn't think I wanted to know. Instead, I repeated my question. Bagra, did you know Morozova? She was quiet for a long time, the only sound the crackle of the fire. Finally, she said, as well as anyone did. Though I suspected as much. The fact was hard to believe. I'd seen Morozova's writings. I wore his amplifiers, but he had never seemed real. He was a saint with a gilded halo, more legend than man to me. There's a bottle of kvass on a shelf in the corner, she said. Out of Misha's reach. Bring it and a glass. It was early for kvass, but I wasn't going to argue. I brought down the bottle and poured for her. She took a long sip and smacked her lips together. The new king doesn't stint, does he? She sighed and settled back. All right, little saint. Since you want to know about Morozova and his precious amplifiers, I'll tell you a story. One I used to tell a little boy with dark hair, a silent boy who rarely laughed, who listened more closely than I realized. A boy who had a name and not a title. In the firelight, the shadowy pools of her eyes seemed to flicker and soften. Morozova was the bonesmith, one of the greatest fabricators who ever lived, and a man who tested the very boundaries of Grisha power. But he was also just a man with a wife. She was Otkazavia, and though she loved him, she did not understand him. I thought of the way the Darkling talked about Otkazia, the predictions he'd made about Maul and the way I'd be treated by Ravka's people. Had he learned those lessons from Bagra? I should tell you that he loved her too, she continued. At least, I think he did. But it was never enough to make him stop to his work. It couldn't temper the need that drove him. This is the curse of Grisha power. You know the way of it, little saint? They spent over a year hunting the stag in Sibia, 2 years sailing the Bone Road in search of the sea web. Great successes for the bonesmith. The first 2 phases of his grand scheme. But when his wife became pregnant, they settled in a small town, a place where he could continue his experiments and hatch his plans for which creature would become the 3rd amplifier. They had little money. When he could be pulled away from his studies, he made his living as a woodworker, and the villagers occasionally came to him with wounds and ailments. He was a healer? I asked. I thought he was a fabricator. Morozova did not draw those distinctions. Few Grisha did in those days. He believed if the science was small enough, anything was possible. And for him, it often was. Are we not all things? The townspeople viewed Morozova and his family with a combination of pity and distrust. His wife wore rags, and his child was rarely seen. Her mother kept her to the house and the fields around it. You see, the little girl had started to show her power early, and it was like nothing ever seen. Bagra took another sip of kvass. She would summon darkness. The words hung in the heated air, their meaning settling over me. You? I breathed. Then the Darkling, I am Morozova's daughter, and the Darkling is the last of Morozova's line. She emptied her glass. My mother was terrified of me. She was sure that my power was some kind of abomination, the result of my father's experiments, and she may well have been right. To dabble in Murzast, well, the results are never quite what one would hope. She hated to hold me, could hardly bear to be in the same room with me. It was only when her second child was born that she came back to herself at all. Another little girl, this one normal like her, powerless and pretty. How my mother doted on her. Years had passed, hundreds, maybe 1,000, but I recognized the hurt in her voice, the sting of always feeling underfoot and unwanted. My father was readying to leave a hunt for the Firebird. I was just a little girl, but I begged him to take me along. I tried to make myself useful, but all I did was annoy him, and eventually he banned me from his workshop. She tapped the table, and I filled her glass once more. And then one day, Morozova had to leave his workbench. He was drawn to the pasture behind his home by the sound of my mother's screams. I had been playing dolls, and my sister had whined and howled and stamped her feet until my mother insisted that I give over my favorite toy, a wooden swan carved by one carved by our father in one of the rare moments that he'd paid me any attention. It had wings so detailed they felt nearly downy, and perfect webbed feet that kept it balanced in water. My sister had it in her hand less than a minute before she snapped its slender neck. Remember, if you can, that I was just a child, a lonely child, with so few treasures of my own. She lifted her glass, but did not drink. I lashed out at my sister. With the cut, I tore her in two. I tried not to picture it, but the image rose up sharp in my mind. A muddy field, a dark-haired little girl, her favorite toy in pieces. She'd thrown a tantrum, as children do, but she'd been no ordinary child. What happened? I finally whispered. The villagers came running. They held my mother back so that she could not get at me. They couldn't make sense of what she was saying. How could a little girl have done such a thing? The priest was already praying over my sister's body when my father arrived. Without a word, Morozova knelt down beside her and began to work. The townspeople didn't understand what was happening, but they sensed power gathering. Did he save her? Yes, said Bagra simply. He was a great healer, and he used every bit of his skill to bring her back, weak, wheezing, and scarred, but alive. I'd read countless versions of St. Elia's martyrdom. The details of the story had been distorted over time. He'd healed his child, not a stranger's, a girl, not a boy. But I suspected one thing that hadn't changed was the ending, and I shivered at the thought of what came next. It was too much, Bagra said. The villagers knew what death looked like. That child should have died, and maybe they were resentful too. How many loved ones had they lost to illness or injury since Morozova had come to their town? How many could he have saved? Maybe it was not just horror or righteousness that drove them, but anger as well. They put him in chains, and my sister, a child who could have had the sense to stay dead. There was no one to defend my father, no one to speak on my sister's behalf. We had lived on the outskirts of their lives and made no friends. They marched him to the river. My sister had to be carried. She had only just learned to walk and couldn't manage it with the chains. I clenched my fists in my lap. I didn't want to hear the rest. As my mother wailed and pleaded, as I cried and fought to get free from some barely known neighbor's arms, they shoved Morozova and his youngest daughter off the bridge, and we watched them disappear beneath the water, dragged under by the weight of the iron chains. Bagra emptied her glass and turned it over on the table. I never saw my father or my sister again. We sat in silence as I tried to piece together the implications of what she'd said. I saw no tears on Bagra's cheeks. Her grief is old, I reminded myself. And yet, I didn't think pain like that ever faded entirely. Grief had its own life, took its own sustenance. Bagra, I said, pushing on, ruthless in my own way. If Morozova died, I never said he died. That was the last I ever saw of him. But he was a Grisha of immense power. He might well have survived the fall. In chains? He was the greatest fabricator who ever lived. It would take more than Otkasia steel to hold him. And you believe he went on to create the third amplifier? His work was his life, she said, and the bitterness of that neglected child edged her words. If he'd had a breath in his body, he would not have stopped searching for the Firebird. Would you? No, I admitted. The Firebird had become my own obsession, a thread of compulsion that linked me to Morozova across centuries. Could he have survived? Bagra seemed so certain that he had. And what about her sister? If Morozova had managed to save himself, might he have rescued his child from the grasp of the river and used his skill to revive her once more? The thought shook me. I wanted to clutch it tightly, turn it over in my hands. but there was still more I needed to know. What did the villagers do to you? Her rasping chuckle snaked through the room, lifting the hair on my arms. If they'd been wise, they would have thrown me in the river too. Instead, they drove my mother and me out of town and left us to the mercy of the woods. My mother was useless. She tore at her hair and wept until she made herself sick. Finally, she just laid down and wouldn't get up, no matter how I cried and called her name. I stayed with her as long as I could. I tried to make a fire to keep her warm, but I didn't know how, she shrugged. I was so hungry. Eventually, I left her and wandered, delirious and filthy, until I came to a farm. They took me in and put together a search party, but I couldn't find the way back to her. For all I know, she starved to death on the forest floor. I stayed quiet, waiting. The kvass was beginning to look very good. Ravka was different then. Grisha had no sanctuary. Power like ours ended in fates like my father's. I kept mine hidden. I followed tales of witches and saints and found the secret enclaves where Grisha studied their science. I learned everything I could, and when the time came, I taught my son. But what about his father? Bagra gave another harsh laugh. You want a love story too? There's none to be had. I wanted a child, so I sought out the most powerful Grisha I could find. He was a heartrender. I don't even remember his name. For a brief moment, I glimpsed the ferocious girl she had been, fearless and wild, a Grisha of extraordinary ability. Then she sighted and shifted in her chair, and the illusion was gone, replaced by a tired old woman huddling by a fire. My son was not. He began so well. We moved from place to place. We saw the way our people lived, the way they were mistrusted, the lives they were forced to eke out in secrecy and fear. He vowed that we would someday have a safe place, that Grisha power would be something to be valued and coveted, something our country would treasure. We would be Ravkins, not just Grisha. That dream was the seed of the Second Army. A good dream, if I'd known. She shook her head. I gave him his pride. I burdened him with ambition. But the worst thing I did was to try to protect him. You must understand, even our own kind shunned us, feared the strangeness of our power. There are no others like us. I never wanted him to feel the way I had as a child, said Bagra. So I taught him that he had no equal and that he was destined to bow to no man. I wanted him to be hard, to be strong. I taught him the lesson my mother and father taught me, to rely on no one, that love, fragile and fickle and raw, it was nothing compared to power. He was a brilliant boy. He learned too well. Bagra's hand shot out. With surprising accuracy, she seized my wrist. Put your hunger aside, Alina. Do you want Morozova and my son? Do what Morozova and my son could not, and give this up. My cheeks were wet with tears. I hurt for her. I hurt for her son. But even so, I knew what my answer would be. I can't. What is infinite? She recited. I knew that text well. The universe and the greed of men, I quoted back to her. You may not be able to survive the sacrifice that Murzos requires. You've tasted that power once, and it almost killed you. I have to try. Bagra shook her head. Stupid girl, she said, but her voice was sad, as if she were chastising another girl from long ago, lost and unwanted, driven by pain and fear. The journals. Years later, I returned to the village of my birth. I wasn't sure what I would find. My father's workshop was long gone, but his journals were there, tucked away in the same hidden niche in the old cellar. She released a disbelieving snort. They'd built a church over it. I hesitated, then said, if Morozova survived, what became of him? He probably took his own life. It's the way most Grisha of great power die. I sat back, stunned. Why? Do you think I never contemplated it? That my son didn't? Lover's age. Children die. Kingdoms rise and fall, and we go on. Maybe Morozova is still wandering the earth, older and more bitter than I am. Or maybe he used his power on himself and ended it all. It's simple enough, like calls to like. Otherwise, she chuckled again, that dry, rattling laugh. You should warn your prince. If he really thinks a bullet will stop a Grisha with 3 amplifiers, he is much mistaken. I shuddered. Would I have the courage to take my own life, if it came down to that? If I brought the amplifiers together, I might destroy the fold, but I might well make something worse in its place. And when I faced the Darkling, even if I dared to use Murzost to create an army of light, would it be enough to end him? Bagra, I asked cautiously, what would it take to kill a Grisha with that kind of power? Bagra tapped the bare skin of my wrist, the naked spot where the 3rd amplifier might rest in a matter of days. Little saint, she whispered, little martyr. I expect we'll find out. I spent the rest of the afternoon wording a plea for aid to the apparat. The missive would be left beneath the altar at the church of St. Lucan in Vernost and, hopefully, would make its way to the White Cathedral through the network of the faithful. We'd used a code that Tolya and Timur knew from their time with the Soldat soul, so if the message fell into the Darkling's hands, he wouldn't realize that in just over 2 weeks' time, Maul and I would be waiting for the apparat's forces in Kriva. The racing city was all but abandoned after the summer, and it was close to the southern border. Either we would have the Firebird or we wouldn't, but we'd be able to march whatever forces we had north under the cover of the fold and meet with Nikolai's troops south of Kribursk. I had two very different sets of luggage. One was nothing but a simple soldier's pack that would be put aboard the bittern. It was stocked with rough-spun trousers, an olive drab coat treated to resist the rain, heavy boots, a small reserve of coin for any bribes or purchases I might need to make, in Diva Stolba, a fur hat, and a scarf to cover Morozova's collar. The other set was stowed on the Kingfisher, a collection of 3 matching trunks, emblazoned with golden sunburst and stuffed with silks and furs. When evening came, I descended to the boiler level to say my goodbyes to Bagra and Misha. After her dire warning, I was hardly surprised that Bagra waved me off with a scowl. But I'd really come to see Misha. I reassured him that I had found someone to continue his lessons while we were gone, and I gifted him with one of the golden sunburst pins worn by my personal guard. Maul wouldn't be able to wear it in the south, and the delight on Misha's face was worth all of Bagra's sneering. I took my time wending my way back through the dark passages. It was quiet down here, and I'd barely had a moment to think since Bagra had told me her story. I knew she'd intended it as a cautionary tale, and yet my thoughts kept returning to the little girl who'd been thrown into the river with Ilya Morozova. Bagra thought she'd died. She'd dismissed her sister at Abkhazia. And what if she simply hadn't shown her power yet? She was Morozova's child, too. Okay. What if her gift was unique, like Bagra's? If she had survived, her father might have taken her with him in pursuit of the Firebird. She might have lived near the Sikurzoi, her power passed down from generation to generation. Over hundreds of years, it might have finally shown itself in me. It was presumption, I knew, terrible arrogance, and yet, if we found the Firebird near Divastolba, so close to the place of my birth, could it really be coincidence? I stopped short. If I was related to Morozova, that meant I was related to the Darkling, and that meant I'd almost... The thought made my skin crawl. No matter how many years and generations might have passed, I still felt like I needed a scalding bath. My thoughts were interrupted by Nikolai striding down the hall toward me. "There's something you should see," he said. "Is everything all right?" "Rather spectacular, actually." He peered at me. "What did the hag do to you? You look like you ate a particularly slimy bug." "Or possibly exchanged kisses and a bit more than that with my cousin," I shuddered. Nikolai offered me his arm. "Well, whatever it is, you'll have to cringe about it later. There's a miracle upstairs, and it won't wait." I looped my arm around through his. "Never one to oversell it, are you, Lansov?" "It's not overselling if you deliver." We just started up the stairs when Maul came bounding down in the opposite direction. He was beaming, his face alight with excitement. That smile was like a bomb going off in my chest. It belonged to a Maul I'd thought had disappeared beneath the scars of this war. He caught sight of me and Nikolai, arms entwined. It took the briefest second for his face to shudder. He bowed and stepped aside for us to pass. "Headed the wrong way," said Nikolai. "You're going to miss it." "Be up in a minute," Maul replied. His voice sounded so normal, so pleasant, I almost believed I'd imagined that smile. Still, it took everything in me to keep climbing those stairs to keep my hand on Nikolai's arm. Despise your heart, I told myself. Do what needs to be done. When we reached the top of the stairs and entered the spinning wheel, my jaw dropped. The lanterns had been extinguished so that the room was dark, but all around us stars were falling. The windows were lit with streaks of light cascading over the mountaintop, like bright fish in a river. "Meteor shower," said Nikolai, as he led me carefully through the room. People had laid blankets and pillows on the heated floor, and were sitting in clusters or lying on their backs, watching the night sky. All at once, the pain in my chest was so bad it nearly bent me double. Because this was what Maul had been coming to show me. Because that look, that open, eager, happy look, had been for me. Because I would always be the first person he turned to when he saw something lovely, and I would do the same. Whether I was a saint or a queen or the most powerful Grisha who ever lived, I would always turn to him. "Beautiful," I managed. "I told you I had a lot of money." "So you arrange celestial events now?" "As a sideline." We stood at the center of the room, gazing up at the glass dome. "I could promise to make you forget him," Nikolai offered. "I'm not sure that's possible. You do realize you're playing havoc with my pride. Your confidence seems perfectly intact." "Think about it," he said, leading me through the crowd to a quiet nook near the western terrace. "I'm used to being the center of attention wherever I go. I've been told I could charm the shoes off a racehorse mid-stride, and you seem impervious." I laughed. "You know well I like you." Nikolai. "Such a tepid sentiment. I don't hear you making declarations of love." "Would they help?" "No." "Flattery? Flowers? 100 head of cattle?" I gave him a shove. "No." Even now, I knew that bringing me up here was less a romantic gesture than it was a display. The mess hall was deserted, and we had this little pocket of the spinning wheel to ourselves. But he'd made sure we'd taken the long way through the crowd. He'd wanted us to be seen together, the future king and queen of Ravka. Nikolai cleared his throat. "Alina, on the very slim chance that we survive the next few weeks, I'm going to ask you to be my wife." My mouth went dry. I'd known this was where we were headed. but it was still strange to hear him say those words. Even if Mal wants to stay on, Nikolai continued, I'm going to have him reassigned. Say goodnight. Tell me to leave, Alina. I understand, I said quietly. Do you? I know I said that we could have a marriage in name only, but if we haven't had a child, I wouldn't want him to have to endure the rumors and the jokes. He clasped his hands behind his back. One horrible royal is bad enough. Children with Nikolai. You don't have to do this, you know, I said. I wasn't sure if I was talking to him or myself. I could lead the Second Army, and you could have pretty much any girl you want. A Shu princess? A Kirch banker's daughter? Or a Rovkan heiress? Or a Grisha like Zoya? Zoya? I make it a policy never to seduce anyone prettier than I am. I laughed. I think that was an insult. Alina, this is the alliance I want. The First and Second Armies brought together. As for the rest, I've always known that whatever marriage I made would be political. It would be about power, not love. But we might get lucky. In time, we might have both. Or the third amplifier will turn me into a power-mad dictator, and you'll have to kill me. Yes, that would make for an awkward honeymoon. He took my hand, circling my bare wrist with his fingers. I tensed and realized I was waiting for the rush of surety that came with the Darkling's touch, or a jolt like the one I'd felt that night at the little palace. When Maul and I had argued by the banya, nothing happened. Nikolai's skin was warm, his grip gentle. I wondered if I would ever feel something so simple again, or if the power in me would just keep jumping and crackling, seeking connection the way lightning seeks high ground. Collar, said Nikolai. Fetters. I won't have to spend much on jewelry. I have expensive taste in tiaras, but only one head. Thus far, I glanced down at my wrist. I should warn you, based on the conversation I had today with Bagra, if things do go wrong with the amplifiers, getting rid of me may require more than your usual firepower. Like what? Possibly another sun summoner. It's simple enough, like calls to like. I'm sure there's a spare around here somewhere. I couldn't help but smile. See? He said. If we're not dead in a month, we might be very happy together. Stop that, I said, still grinning. What? Saying the right thing? I'll try to wean myself of the habit. His smile faltered. He reached out and brushed the hair back from my face. I froze. He rested his hand in the space where the collar met the curve of my neck. And when I didn't bolt, he slid his palm up to cup my cheek. I wasn't sure I wanted this. You said you wouldn't kiss me until you were thinking of me instead of trying to forget him. He moved closer, the light from the meteor shower playing over his features. He leaned in, giving me time to pull away. I could feel his breath when he said, I love it when you quote me. He brushed his lips over mine once, briefly, then again. It was less a kiss than the promise of one. When you're ready, he said. Then he tucked my hand in his, and we stood together, watching the spill of stars streaking the sky. We might be happy in time. People fell in love every day. Genya and David, Tamar and Nadia. But were they happy? Would they stay that way? Maybe love was superstition, a prayer we said to keep the truth of loneliness at bay. I tilted my head back. The stars looked like they were close together when they were millions of miles apart. In the end, maybe love just meant longing for something impossibly brighter and forever out of reach. And that's the end of chapter 10. Looking for chapter 11 to see how far we are. Yeah, okay, so we'll go ahead and read one more chapter tonight. Chapter 11. I just want to make sure. Yeah, okay. Chapter 11. The next morning, I found Nikolai on the eastern terrace taking weather readings. Maul's team was set to depart within the hour, and was only waiting for the all clear. I pulled up my hood. It wasn't quite snowing, but a few flakes had settled on my cheeks and hair. How does everything look? I asked, handing Nikolai a glass of tea. Not bad, he replied. Gusts are mild, and the pressure's holding steady. They might have it rough through the mountains, but it shouldn't be anything the Bittern can't handle. I heard the door open behind me, and Maul and Timur stepped out onto the terrace. They were dressed in peasant clothes, fur hats, and sturdy wool coats. Are we a go? Timur asked. She was trying to seem calm, but I could hear the barely leashed excitement in her voice. Behind her, I saw Nadia with her face pressed against the glass, awaiting the verdict. Nikolai nodded. You're a go. Timur's grin was blinding. She managed a restrained bow, then turned to Nadia and gave her the signal. Nadia whooped and broke into something between a seizure and a dance. Nikolai laughed. If only she'd show a little enthusiasm. Be safe, I said as I embraced Tamar. Take care of Tolia for me, she replied. Then she whispered, we left the cobalt lace in your trunk. Wear that tonight. I rolled my eyes and gave her a shove. I knew I would see them all in a week, but I was surprised at how much I was going to miss them. There was an awkward pause as I faced Maul. His blue eyes were vibrant in the gray morning light. The scar at my shoulder twinged. Safe journey, moi Servigny, he bowed. I knew what was expected, but I hugged him anyway. For a moment, he just stood there. Then his arms closed hard around me. Safe journey, Alina, he whispered into my hair, and quickly stepped back. We'll be on our way soon as the Kingfisher returns. I expect to see you all safe and whole in 1 week's time, Nikolai said, and packing some all-powerful bird bones. Maul bowed. Saint Speed, moi Sarvich. Nikolai offered his hand and they shook. Good luck, Ortsev. Find the Firebird, and when this is over, I'll see you well rewarded. A farmhouse in Udova, a dacha near the city, whatever you want. I don't need any of that. Just, he dropped Nikolai's hand and looked away. Deserve her. He hastened back into the spinning wheel with Tamar behind him. Through the glass, I saw them talking to Nadia and Harsha. Well, said Nikolai, at least he's learned to make an exit. I ignored the ache in my throat and said, how long will it take us to reach Ketterdam? 2 to 3 days, depending on the weather and our squallors. We'll go north, then over the True Sea. It's safer than traveling over Ravka. What's it like? Ketterdam? It's... He never finished his sentence. A shadowed blur cut across my vision, and Nikolai was gone. I stood staring at the place where he'd been, then screamed as I felt claws close over my shoulders, and my feet lifted from the floor. I glimpsed Maul bursting through the door to the terrace, Tamar on his heels. He lunged across the distance and seized me around the waist, yanking me back down. I twisted, arms moving in an arc, sending a blaze of light burning through the Nishovia that had hold of me. It wavered and exploded into nothing. I fell to the terrace in a heap, toppling with Maul, bleeding from where the monster's talons had pierced my skin. I was on my feet in seconds, horrified by what I saw. The air was full of darting black shapes, winged monsters that moved unlike any natural creature. Behind me, I heard chaos erupting in the hall. The smash of breaking glass as Nishovia hurled themselves against the windows. Get the others out, I yelled to Tamar. Get them away from here. We can't leave you. I won't lose them too. Go, Maul bellowed at her. He shouldered his rifle, taking aim at the attacking monsters. I lashed out with the cut, but they were moving so quickly that I couldn't target them. I craned my neck, searching the sky for Nikolai. My heart was pounding. Where was the Darkling? If his monsters were here, then he must be nearby. He came from above. His creatures moved around him like a living cloak, their wings beating the air in a rippling black wave, forming and reforming, bearing him aloft, their bodies slipping apart and together, absorbing the bullets from Maul's gun. Saints, Maul swore. How did he find us? The answer came quickly. I saw a red shape suspended between two Nishovia, their black claws sunk deeply into their captive's body. Sergei's face was chalky, his eyes wide and terrified, his lips moving in a silent prayer. Shall I spare him, Alina? Said the Darkling. Leave him alone. He betrayed you to the first Oprichnik he could find. I wonder, will you offer him mercy or justice? I don't want him harmed, I shouted. My mind was reeling. Had Sergei really betrayed us? He'd been on edge since the battle at the Little Palace. But what if he'd been planning this all along? Maybe he'd just been trying to slip away during our fight with the militia. Maybe he'd let Genya's name drop deliberately. He'd been so ready to leave the spinning wheel. That was when I realized what Sergei was muttering. Not prayers, just one word over and over again. Safe, safe, safe. Give him to me, I said. He betrayed me first, Alina. He remained in All's Alta when he should have come to my side. He sat on your council, plotted against me. He told me everything. Thank the saints. We kept the location of the firebread a secret. So, the Darkling said, the decision is mine, and I'm afraid that I choose justice. In one movement, the Nishovia ripped Sergei's limbs from his body and severed his head from his neck. I had the briefest glimpse of the shock on his face, his mouth open in a silent scream. Then the pieces disappeared beneath the cloud bank. All saints, Maul swore. I gagged, but I had to shove down my terror. Maul and I turned in a slow circle, back to back. We were surrounded by Nishovia. Behind me, I could hear the sounds of screams and glass shattering in the spinning wheel. Here we are again, Alina. Your army against mine. Do you think your soldiers will fare any better this time? I ignored him and shouted into the misty grayness. Nikolai! Ah, the pirate prince. I have regretted many of the things I've had to do in this war, said the Darkling. This is not one of them. A shadow soldier swooped down. In horror, I saw it held Nikolai struggling in its arms. Any bit of courage I had evaporated. I couldn't see Nikolai ripped limb from limb. Please, the word tore from me, without dignity or constraint. Please don't. The Darkling raised his hand. I clapped my fingers over my mouth, my legs already buckling. But the Nishovia didn't attack Nikolai. It tossed him onto the terrace. His body hit the stone with a sickening thud and rolled to a stop. Alina, don't! Maul tried to hold me back, but I broke free of him and ran to where Nikolai lay, falling to my knees beside him. He moaned. His coat was torn where the creature's claws had shredded the fabric. He tried to push himself up on his elbows, and blood dribbled from his mouth. This was unexpected, he said weakly. You're okay, I said. It's okay. I appreciate your optimism. I caught movement from the corner of my eye and saw two blots of shadow slip free from the Darkling's hands. They slithered over the lip of the balcony, undulating like serpents, heading directly toward us. I raised my hands and slashed out with the cut, obliterating one side of the terrace, but I was too slow. The shadows slithered lightning fast across the stone and darted into Nikolai's mouth. His eyes widened. His breath hitched in surprise, drawing whatever the darkling had released into his lungs. We stared at each other in shock. What? What was that? He choked. I. He coughed, shuddered. Then his fingers flew to his chest, tearing open the remains of his shirt. We both looked down and saw shadows spreading beneath his skin in fragile black lines, splintering like veins in marble. No! I groaned. No! No! The cracks traveled across his stomach, down his arms. Alina, he said helplessly. The darkness fractured beneath his skin, climbing his throat. He threw his head back and screamed, the tendons flexing in his neck as his whole body contorted, his back bowing. He shoved up to his knees, chest heaving. I reached for him as he convulsed. He released another raw scream, and two black shards burst from his back. They unfurled like wings. His head shot up. He looked at me, face beaded with sweat, gaze panicked and desperate. Alina! Then his eyes, his clever hazel eyes, went black. Nikolai? I whispered. His lips curled back, revealing teeth of black onyx. They had formed fangs. He snarled. I stumbled backward. His jaws snapped, closed a bare inch from me. Hungry? The darkling asked. I wonder which one of your friends you'll eat first. I raised my hands, reluctant to use my power. I didn't want to hurt him. Nikolai, I begged, don't do this. Stay with me. Hey, sweetie. Yay. You'll make it, honey. I love you. No eating after 6. After 6 or 7? Okay, sounds good. True. True. Alright, sounds good. Alright, that sounds good. I'll make sure to mark it down in there. Yeah. Maybe. We'll see. I know. Reading. No worries, I'm almost done. Well. Yeah, I'm almost done. I'll call you back. Okay, I'll text you then. Alright, I love you. Bye. Okay. Sorry. Continuing on. Where was I? Give me 1 second, please. Clause. Wait. Okay, here we go. I raised my hands, reluctant to use my power. I didn't want to hurt him. Nikolai, I begged. I don't do this. Stay with me. His face spasmed in pain. He was in there, fighting himself, battling the appetite that had taken hold of him. His hands flexed. No, his claws. He howled, and the noise that came from him was desperate, shrieking, completely inhuman. His wings beat the air as he rose from the terrace. Monstrous, but still beautiful. Still somehow Nikolai. He looked down at the dark veins coursing over his torso, at the razor-sharp talons that had pushed him from his blackened fingertips. He held out his hands, as if pleading with me for an answer. Nikolai, I cried. I turned in the air, wrenching himself away, and I raced upward, as if he could somehow outpace the need inside him, his black wings carrying him higher as he cut through the Nishovia. He looked back once, and even from a distance, I felt his anguish and confusion. Then he was gone, a black speck in the gray sky, while I remained trembling below. Eventually, said the Darkling, he will feed. I'd warned Nikolai of the Darkling's vengeance, but even I couldn't have foreseen the elegance of this, the perfect cruelty. Nikolai had made a fool of the Darkling, and now the Darkling had taken my polished, brilliant, noble prince and made him into a monster. Death would have been too kind. A sound came from me, something guttural, animal, a noise I didn't recognize. I raised my hands and brought the cut blazing down in two furious arcs. They struck the whirring shapes that surrounded the Darkling, and I saw some burst apart into nothing. Only to have others take their place. I didn't care. I struck him again and again. If I could knock the top of a mountain, surely my power was good for something in this battle. Fight me, I screamed. Let's end this now. Here. Fight you, Alina? There is no fight to be had. He gestured to the Nishovia. Seize them. They swarmed down from every direction, a seething black mass. Beside me, Maul opened fire. I could smell gunpowder and hear the clink of empty cartridges as bullets hit the ground. I was focusing every bit of power I had, nearly pinwheeling my arms, cutting through 5, 10, 15 shadow soldiers at a time. But it was no good. There were simply too many of them. Then suddenly they stopped. The Nishovia hung in the air, bodies limp, wings moving in silent rhythm. Did you do that? Maul asked. I don't think so. Silence descended on the terrace. I could hear the wail of the wind, the sounds of the battle raging behind us. Abomination! We turned. Bagra stood inside the doorway, her hand on Misha's shoulder. The boy was shaking, his eyes so wide I could see more white than iris. Behind them, our soldiers were fighting not just Nishovia, but Oprichniki and the Darkling's own Grisha in their blue and red kefta. He'd had his creatures bring them all to the mountaintop. Guide me, Bagra told Misha. What courage it must have taken for him to lead her out onto the terrace, past the Nishovia, who shifted and bumped up against each other, following her passage like a field of glistening black reeds. Only those closest to the Darkling remained moving, clinging to their master, their wings beating in unison. The Darkling's face was livid. I should have known I'd find you cloistered with the enemy. Go back inside, he ordered. My soldiers will not harm you. Bagra ignored him. When they reached the end of the terrace, Misha placed her hand on the lip of the remaining wall. She leaned against it, releasing an utmost contented sigh, and gave Misha a nudge with her stick. Go on, boy. Run to the scrawny little saint, he hesitated. Bagra reached out and found his cheek, then patted it none too gently. Go on, she repeated. I want you to talk to my son. Misha, Maul said, and the boy bolted over to us, ducking behind Maul's coat. The Nishovia showed no interest in him, their attention focused wholly on Bagra. What is it you want? I asked the Darkling. And do not hope to plead for mercy for these fools. Only to meet your monsters, she said. Bagra leaned her stick against the wall and held out her arms. The Nishovia moved forward, wrestling and nudging against each other. One nuzzled its head against her palm, as if it were sniffing her. Was it curiosity I sensed in them, or hunger? They know me, these children. Like calls to like. Stop this, demanded the Darkling. Bagra's palms began to fill with darkness. The sight was jarring. I'd only ever seen her summon once before. She had hidden her power away as I had once stifled mine, but she had done it for the sake of her son's secrets. I remembered what she'd said about Agrisha turning his power on himself. She shared the Darkling's blood, his power. Would she act against him now? I will not fight you, the Darkling said. Then strike me down. You know I won't. She smiled, then gave a little chuckle, as if she were pleased with with a precocious student. It's true. That's why I still have hope. Her head snapped to me. Girl, she said, sharply. Her blind eyes were blank, but in that moment I could have sworn she saw me clearly. Do not fail me again. She isn't strong enough to fight me either, old woman. Take up your stick, and I will return you to the little palace. A terrible suspicion crept into me. Bagra had given me the strength to fight, but she never told me to do it. The only thing she'd ever asked of me was to run. Bagra, I began. My hut, my fire, the sound of a pleasant thing, she said, but I find the dark is the same wherever I am. You earned those eyes, he said coldly, but I heard the hurt there too. I did, she said with a sigh, and more. Then, without warning, she slammed her hands together. Thunder boomed over the mountain and darkness billowed from her palms, like banners unfurling, twisting and curling around the Nishovia. They shrieked and jittered, whirling in confusion. Know that I loved you, she said to the Darkling. Know that that is not enough. In a single movement, she shoved herself up on the wall, and before I could draw breath to scream, she tipped forward and vanished over the ledge, trailing the Nishovia behind her in entangled skeins of darkness. They tumbled past us in a rush, a shrieking black wave that rolled over the terrace and plummeted down, drawn by the power she exuded. No! The Darkling roared. He dove after her, the wings of his soldiers beating with his fury. Alina, now! Through the haze of my horror, I heard Maul's words, felt him pushing me through the door. And suddenly, Maul had Misha in his arms, and we were running through the observatory. Nishovia streamed past us, yanked toward the terrace by Bagra's trailing skeins. Others simply hovered in confusion as their master drew further away. Run, Bagra had told me again and again, and now I did. The heated floor was slippery and with melted snow. The massive windows of the spinning wheel had been shattered and flurries gusted through the room. I saw fallen bodies, pockets of fighting. I couldn't seem to think straight. Sergei, Nikolai, Bagra, falling through the mists, the rocks rising up to meet her. Would she cry out? Would she close her blind eyes? Little saint, little martyr. Toya was running toward us. I saw two oprichniki come at him, swords drawn. Without breaking stride, he threw out his fists and the soldiers collapsed, clutching their chests, their mouths dripping blood. Where are the others? Maul shouted as we came level with Toya and pelleted for the staircase. In the hangar, but they're outnumbered. We need to get down there. Some of the Darkling's blue-robed squallers had tried to blockade the stairs. They hurled crates and furniture at us in mighty gusts of wind. I slashed out with the cut, smashing the crates to kindling before they could reach us, sending the squallers scattering. The worst was waiting for the hangar below. All semblance of order had broken down in the panic to get away from the Darkling's soldiers. People were swarming over the Pelican and the Ibis. The Pelican already hovered above the hangar floor. Borne aloft by squall current, soldiers were pulling on its cables, trying to drag it back down and climb aboard, unwilling to wait for the other barge. Someone gave the order, and the Pelican surged free, plowing through the crowd as it took flight. It rose into the air, trailing screaming men like strange anchors, and disappeared from view. Zoya, Nadia, and Harsha were backed up against one of the holes of the bittern, using fire and wind to try to keep back a crowd of Grisha and Oprichniki. Tamar was on the deck, and I was relieved to see Nevsky on Etter's side, along with a few other soldiers from the 22nd. But behind them, Adric lay in a pool of blood. His arm hung from his body at a bizarre angle. His face was white with shock. Genya knelt over him, tears streaming down her face as David stood above her, with a rifle, firing down at the attacking crowd with precarious aim. Stig was nowhere to be seen. Had he fled on the Pelican or simply been left behind in the spinning wheel? Stig, I said. There's no time, replied Maul. We shoved through the mob, and at a shouted order from his brother, Tamar slid into place and seized the bittern's wheel. We laid down cover as Zoya and the other squallers scrambled on deck. Maul stumbled as a bullet struck his thigh, but Harshaw had hold of him, dragging him aboard. Get us moving, shouted Nevsky. He signaled to the other soldiers, and they arrayed themselves along the hole's railing, opening fire on the Darkling's men. I took a place beside them, setting bright light up against the crowd, blinding them so they couldn't take aim. Maul and Toya took their positions at the lines as Zoya filled the sails, but her power wasn't enough. Nadia, we need you, bellowed Tamar. Nadia looked up from where she knelt beside her brother. Her face was streaked with tears, but she rose to her feet, swaying, and forced a draft up into the sails. The bittern started to slide forward on its runners. We're too heavy, Zoya cried. Nevsky grabbed at my shoulder. Survive, he said roughly. Help him. Did he know what had happened to Nikolai? I will, I vowed. The other barge. He didn't stop to listen. Nevsky shouted, For the 22nd! He vaulted over the side, and the other soldiers followed without hesitation. They threw themselves into the mob. Tamar called the order, and we shot from the hangar. The bittern plunged sickeningly from the ledge. Then the sails snapped into place, and we were rising. I looked back and caught one last glimpse of Nevsky, rifle at his shoulder, before he was swallowed by the crowd. And that is the end of Chapter 11 of Ruined and Rising. I hope you all enjoyed this book. I know this was quite a bit of a cliffhanger. It was a pretty sad chapter, to be honest, but really good read tonight. We're gonna try to be reading 50 pages a night whenever I get the chance to. Tomorrow I will be coming back here to read again. And we will be reading another 50 pages roughly, so we'll see where we'll be at that time. But I hope you're all enjoying this book, and I hope to see you all in the next video. Until then, I am the Epileptic Explorer, and I hope you all have a fantastic evening.